Well, welcome back from the break, everyone. It is a pleasure to see so many faces, known and unknown. A pity we couldn't be there in person this year, but such, unfortunately, are the times we live in. It is a great pleasure of ours to bring this talk to you on creating civic value through data governance and open data. I am Thomas Linder. I am the coordinator for Insight and Knowledge Development at Open North, and I am here with my extraordinarily excellent colleague, Lauriane Gorce. And we are very much looking forward to the next half an hour with you. So before we continue, I would like to briefly acknowledge the land that I find myself on here. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. And I am grateful to have the opportunity to work and live here. And it is on that note of values-led approach to working together and living together that we would like to talk about how we understand open data, civic values, and what data governance might do to support that. So what we're going to do today, very briefly, I will talk a little bit about the next 30 minutes, and then Lauriane will take it away with a description of the innovation ecosystem in Montreal that we've been working on. And then finally, I will finish off the conversation with a description of some of the other work that we've been doing to expand the ideas of data governance into all of our work at Open North. So a little bit about Open North, just very briefly. It was founded in 2011. It is one of Canada's leading not-for-profit organizations working at the intersection of issues of open data, data governance, open procurement, public consultation, and open smart cities. Our missions are numerous, but they include doing research, collecting data on the state of digital transformation in Canada, designing solutions to support municipalities as they undertake their own digital transformation strategies, building capacity to support them in that way too, and developing our network. Our vision is to support the responsible and effective use of data and technology to help build transparent and accountable and inclusive communities and really create value for the common good. That is where our evolved understanding of data governance really comes into play. So for part one, how did we get here? Open North has been working in and around data governance and open data for a long time. But recently, we started to realize as we supported many of the municipalities that questions of value and values were coming up more and more. What values underpin our strategies? What value are we trying to build? And we became to realize that open is also a kind of value. So we started wondering, in and amongst all these often conflicting values with different stakeholders, with different needs and different engagement requirements, how do we understand the importance of this heterogeneity of values? So we wrote a paper called Creating Civic Value in Open Smart Communities, and I encourage everyone to go and have a look at it. And it is through this concept of civic value that we understand this multiform nature of value. And we started then to think about, given that there is this complexity around value, how do we assess, how do we determine and choose what to implement, how to implement it, what to measure and how to measure it, and how to actually go about implementing this? And we realized it requires a far more inclusive and active discussion. And to facilitate this kind of discussion, we then realized what we need is a much broader conception of data governance. We needed to take the understandings of data governance that were frequently siloed in either the corporate world or just internally within government and expand it far beyond that to include all potential stakeholders in a community. It also needed to be an understanding of data governance that acknowledges the existence of different needs that are frequently in tension with each other, where mediation and mitigation is required. One that could really take the interests of the different stakeholders and work through the difficult trade-offs that sometimes exist between the multiform values that might exist in any one digital strategy project. For example, there is inherent tension between certain open data and certain indigenous data sovereignty approaches. Both come with clear beneficial values, yet there is tension there. That's a data governance framework that allows for this kind of negotiation to happen and can created with an inclusive and a transparent and accountable framework is necessary. And this is what we have spent the last many months at this point building towards. So a brief recap before I hand over to my colleague and she talks about their excellent project. When thinking about data and society from the perspective of desired civic values, and given that many projects have different and conflicting values, all of which need to be negotiated, it behooves us to think about the impacts we want to generate and the principles that underpin the strategy. But how do we do that? We've decided that one of the ways in order to support thinking about this complexity would be through a new approach to data governance. And what kind of approach to data governance would enable this kind of negotiation, would enable transparency and inclusivity and accountability to make sure that the negotiation is done in good faith and effectively and inclusively for everyone? That would be a framework that is iterative and follows an implementation and monitoring driven approach. And with that, I will hand it over to my colleague to talk about exactly how we did that.
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, very good preparation to the rest. So yeah, data governance, many talk about it. Few can actually define it. Fewer still can explain why existing definitions are lacking and how many have developed and tested a whole new approach in very concrete, different contexts. Maybe in the talk with the panel with my colleague Marie yesterday on health data, for example. So yeah, we've been working on data governance for a few years now. So as a quick recap, and Tom, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, we've been working on it for more than 5 years, actually starting with our Open Smart Cities Guide, and then early work with Toronto on data governance and digital infrastructure, and then some landmark reports on digital data partnership in 2021, on data governance, and very interesting Quebec civil law data trust that we're working on, and yeah, on in the ad sector. So it's been a while now, and we really saw the need for a new approach even with our work, within our work. So we had the opportunity with Montréal en Commun to start working on that. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So working on that in 2020, and we really developed very concrete tools that I will present in a very concrete way for Montréal en Commun ecosystem. And my colleague Tom also worked on producing a new design that he will also present briefly today. So basically, we're sharing our very concrete experience, me in Montreal, Thomas for the whole Canada implementation and digital transformation. So yeah, let me start with Montreal then. So for the part 2. So I will resume on a very concrete application. Just a little bit of context. I won't read everything. But Montréal en Commun is an innovation ecosystem, so it's really a hub to support innovation in Montreal. It's been allowed thanks to the funding of the Smart City Challenge from Infrastructure Canada, and is managed by the City of Montreal. So 16 projects, smart cities projects, so they generate data, right? And our role in that is really to help govern this data with a set of value aligned with Montreal value. So in the next slide, you'll see the principle for the digital data charter that the City of Montreal released. And I would guess that most people will agree these are good ethical principles. Right to privacy, consent, ecologic transition, inclusion, but it's not operational. It's a good base, and we started with that, but how do you translate it into concrete action? So in the next slide, I invite you to meet Ayesha, a fictional character. And why is she here? The idea of this charter is to implement in concrete projects the values of this charter, right? So this is what we work on. Ayesha works for a nonprofit and develops a technical solution for amateur athletes. And we'll see in the next slide that she collects some data, for example, GPS traces that show a journey by bike, a bike journey with some speed, distances, when, where, etc. And they're not collected randomly. They have a purpose, right? For the amateur athlete to track their performance, and for the Ayesha's team to have some idea of cool places to organize a race, for example. So there is intention here in the data collection. And so again, how do we deploy data governance in their project? You see in the next slide that we really focus on the context, the reality of Ayesha. That nonprofit organization has some strategic objective, for example, to develop these technological solutions. And these objectives are the goal of data governance as a destination. And they ask some strategic question. There is in Quebec a new law, Loi 25, to modernize personal data protection. So what is this impact? What is the impact of the law on their project? What data do they need for their to reach their strategic objectives? How to ensure they actually merit the trust people that will use their platform. So yeah, these are some questions that data governance can help answer. And we need also, in the next slide, to take into account the roadblocks that are real. Sometimes there is lack of organizational resource. Sometimes there are other priorities that are prioritized internally, and data governance is a bit left aside. And it's hard also when companies, organizations work in silos, for example. So these are very real constraints. So yeah, in the next slide, we'll take a little break and recap. So how does data governance can help with all that? I'll present briefly our data governance approach. You can go to the next. So this data governance approach will help Ayesha to understand what is at stake and envision some very concrete solutions to implement in her project. So in the next slide, you see that, yeah, and you can go next slide actually. Thanks. So as a recap, data are constructed. They don't exist in the real world by themselves. They've been collected for a purpose, like we've shown with Ayesha. And when they're collected, they only have potential value. And this value could be realized, fulfilled only if some decisions are made about them. So this is important to just remember, have in mind. And then we actually see, next slide, yeah, that data governance is what is about these decisions and all the factors and that influence criteria that influence these decisions related to data. And in the next slide, you actually see that many stakeholders take this decision on a regular basis, and some stakeholders are structurally underrepresented in the decisions that actually concern them, that have impact on their life. So next slide, we see that as Tom already very well said, there are some tensions. There are actually a lot of values that are potentially sought in the data, and also in negotiation. So some individuals want to protect their privacy, right? So data collection, privacy, it's a negotiation. So on the next slide, yeah, you'll see with many factors influencing decisions, many stakeholders that make decisions, many values that you can seek in data. There is no turnkey solution here. So what we really mean on the next slide is that data governance need always happen, so the decision happen, but they need to be consistent. Yeah, next slide. So yeah, again, how can we make sure this data governance vision is actually realized? We developed a few tools to help Ayesha actually do that. So the first tool, next slide, is a data governance framework. So we took the high-level principles and turned them into very concrete actions, accompanied with some did you knows, useful resources, so that Ayesha can actually do concrete things to, one step at a time, decision after a decision, improve her data governance. And you have an example here to identify risk for a data use case. So this is one example. And we actually have more than 70 tactics. So very concrete actions. So how does Ayesha implement it? It's not one at a time, it's actually in teams. So in the next slide, you'll see our other project, other tool, auto-evaluation survey, where Ayesha and her whole team can gather and see, where they are at in terms of data governance. And you have an example of what can be shown. So the percentage of very concrete actions that are implemented, that are in process of being implemented, some that are not implemented. And they can start with that and prioritize thanks to this, and take it little by little and then see how they progress along the way. So in the next slide, let's say in our scenario, fictional scenario, Ayesha struggles to manage data-related risk, and also struggles to write a privacy policy. So we also have, for Montréal en Commun ecosystem, some very targeted advisory service to really help with one concrete action and really help it go further and be implemented. So really deep dive with a partner in their reality and real context. And then also have this community of practice to make sure when we test and experiment on our tools, we actually share the knowledge. So this is what I show with the next slide, that we really understand that with our tests, taking our tools, testing it on the field, we really learn and have new knowledge that we want to make sure are shared. For example, in a guide about writing a privacy policy. So this is it. You've seen, next slide, a data governance journey as we developed it for Montréal en Commun partners. As a little recap, starting with the partners' strategic objectives, then go into the principles, their tension also between the principles and the very concrete action you can take to implement them with our data governance framework. then have a survey tool to know where you're at in implementing these very concrete actions. Then Aisha can prioritize, have them implemented, and then have a follow-up and monitoring of the progress, and then do it again. So it's really little steps after little steps. So if you want to know more about it, we have a landing page for this project next. So feel free to go. It's only in French for now. Will be released in English soon. And yeah, that's how, next slide, we implemented the digital data charter into very concrete actions and into very concrete projects outside of the city when the charter itself was released by the city. So yeah, Tom, I'm very happy to hear you talk about the next steps for data governance at Open North.
Thank you very much, Lauriane. In the next part, we will talk a little bit about our next steps at Open North, how we plan on taking this new approach to data governance, one that starts from civic values and then works down to the very concrete implementation steps that each project needs to take to actually implement that. So here are some of the approaches that we will be taking over the next, well, some that we already are taking and others that are coming over the next few months to really mobilize and support the implementation of this approach. So we've developed an online learning module. Open North has long had an online learning platform. We call it On Track, the Open North Training Center, I believe, where we host numerous different learning modules for all sorts of topics. And now we have one on data governance. So I will include a link in a subsequent slide, and I encourage everyone to go and have a look and check it out. It is still in what you might call the beta phase. So we encourage feedback from everyone. Let us know what you think. If parts are unclear, if you think a part needs further explanation or perhaps has too much explanation in it, that's also always possible. We would love to hear about that. We're also engaging in a series of Community Solution Network workshops over the next few months on stakeholder engagement in its relationship to data governance, and the same for civic values, AI, and Indigenous data sovereignty. Finally, we have 2 more projects in the works to test this approach out, one in the area of data governance and using data analytics to support climate resilience, and another one to apply this approach to data governance to open government and policing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those in the few minutes we have left, and then open it up to any questions that might exist. So this Open North training course we have, that's the link at the bottom there, that will lead you to the platform for all the courses. From there, you can then choose the data governance course or any one of the other courses. All our courses are, of course, freely accessible to anyone. This is an advanced course. We have 2 levels, introduction and advanced. It builds on previous courses around data, around governance, and on the Open Smart City Guide. It contains lessons around defining data governance, the importance of doing data governance, and also includes several case studies, including the Montreal case, and will help bring users from a consideration of values, like openness as a value, down to the necessity of figuring out how to actually implement this through a data governance framework. This is just one snippet that I included, so you can get a sense of what some of the course looks like. This is the 3rd module, and it covers a series of data governance examples. Then in the Community Solutions Network, we are developing a number of workshops. Here are some dates. The others are still TBD, but probably in January, to take this new approach to data governance and apply it in different scenarios. So the Community Solutions Network is a network of participating municipalities who are coming together in a collaborative forum to work through different digital transformation projects. And this collaborative process was one of the spurs for rethinking data governance in the first place. So in these workshops, we will be applying this data governance framework and testing to see how it fits with various issues, digital strategies, barriers, etc., that our participants might be facing. So the first one will be around stakeholder engagement. How can a data governance framework be useful when thinking about stakeholder engagement, thinking about who is involved and how decisions are made that involve data, given that these are all digital transformation projects, they all involve data, and therefore a data governance framework is necessary. Second, we will be talking about civic value. As I have mentioned before, civic value really was one of the original issues that caused us to rethink a lot of this. What values underpin a digital transformation project? What value does a project seek to build, to gain? Here again, because of the inherent tension between different values, data governance can help. And then in the new year, we will be looking at artificial intelligence, how municipalities can develop algorithmic impact assessments, and how data governance can help assess the tensions between different kinds of risks and benefits. Again, it's a value question. And then finally, we will be holding a session on Indigenous data sovereignty together with various partners to discuss how principles like OCAP might best be applied to govern tensions between openness and sovereignty. Finally, on expanding data governance further still, we have a project together with CITE Living Lab at ENAP to think through how data analytics are increasingly being used to create resilience in climate systems, whether it's for mitigation or adaptation. What would a resilient data governance look like? What does it mean to have a complex data system and to govern that from this kind of inclusive, transparent, and accountable perspective? How would we adapt our tool to such a specific situation? And then we are also engaged in a project to think through the implications of applying, again, a transparent and an accountable approach to data governance to the very complex issue of policing and police technology and data collection. This project was generously funded by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, as digital transformation is as important and relevant in today's conversation in policing as it is in cities. So with that, I would just like to briefly recap our approach. What does it mean to think about data and society from the perspective of civic value? It means to understand that there are inherent tensions between the values, to understand that when you're thinking about impacts and principles, these tensions need to be explicitly discussed and negotiated. Given that we are talking about data here, we are then necessarily talking about data governance. So if that is the case, how do we understand data governance? And then how do we go about designing a framework for data governance that would best enable this kind of debate and negotiation to happen and come to a fruitful outcome? This would be a framework that from the very beginning embeds ideas of transparency, inclusivity, and accountability in its decision-making. And this is exactly what the learning module really tries to get at. What are the questions we need to think through, and how do we think through them in order to create this kind of framework that supports negotiation of these inherently, well, perhaps not inherently, but values that frequently live in tension to each other. And this, our first stab at this has been the excellent tool that Lauriane just presented to all of you. There is a brief summary, and at that point, I will open the space up to any questions that might exist. And thank you very much.
If there are any questions in the room, you can step to the microphone. right. Any questions from the online window? No, I don't see any. All right. Well, in that case, thank you very much for the presentation today. I think that really opens your mind to the issues of governance and what that looks like, and sort of how to think through the implications of not only having data, but then how do you manage it and govern it once you have it. So we're going to move into our next presentation. I'm going to ask my colleague Philippe to introduce our next presenter, and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much.